So we are the panel about the Just Transition Visioning Project, and we're going to be going through different sections. I'm going to share a little bit more about our organization as a community partner on this, and you're going to be hearing from William Estrada as well as Kaitlyn Stancy about their roles as partner artists within this. So again, hi, my name is Ashley Williams, and I just wanted to start out this panel and presentation with just really acknowledging that we stand on the shoulders of giants, and that really when it comes to the intersection of art and activism, really the visionaries and innovators of this was really the Harlem Renaissance and the Civil Rights Movement. And if not for them, right, we wouldn't be where we are today and really talking about art as resistance. And so we'll be showing a little bit more visuals of what that's looked like within our work. I also want to acknowledge, in terms of the brave artists that, in the face of censorship, haven't stopped talking about Palestine. And so, despite, right, their lives, their bodies being on the line, they haven't stopped calling for a ceasefire, they haven't stopped calling for an end of the war. And again, this is the reason that we do this work. So, solidarity with Palestine and everyone there on the ground. And with that, I'm going to start my presentation. So this is a picture of all of us up here and the collaborators on the Just Transition Visioning Project. And my name, again, is Ashley. I actually grew up in Ottawa, Illinois, just southwest of here, actually, and by Starved Rock State Park. I really got activated through this work as an executive director and environmental justice organizer through actual art. I worked on a lot of different protest signs and visuals for a local resistance against a frac sand mining mine that was being proposed outside of the state park. So this was a number of years ago, and I found myself in Chicago following that fight and really cut my teeth with organizing with the amazing folks on the Southeast side, the Coalition to Ban Pet Coke and the Southeast Environmental Task Force. So they have been such a second home and organizing family for me. I now reside in Michigan City, Indiana, and as mentioned, I am the executive director of Just Transition Northwest Indiana. JTNWI, we are a grassroots environmental justice organization. We really actually came about through a local fight where we were trying to sound the alarms about a silent crisis on the shores of Lake Michigan, which was actually coal ash waste, 2 million tons as we speak, that are currently leaking into Lake Michigan. And so we got activated, we formed because we said, right, no one else is gonna save us. So we got organized, we came together, and never in our wildest dreams would we have imagined that we would still be here today, servicing the Tri-County area. We are from LaPorte, Porter, and Lake counties is really our primary area where we organize. We do a lot of work, solidarity work with Chicago and the South Side, and as well as across the Midwest and even nationally. And for us, we're really rooted in the Just Transition framework, which we'll talk about here in a second. And what exactly is that? I want to give you a little bit of context on my home in Northwest Indiana. So Northwest Indiana, I don't know, I'm sure folks that have been through are familiar to some degree. It's just this wild dichotomy where you have this gorgeous biodiverse region, right? The Indiana Dunes, Lake Michigan, right? The fifth most biodiverse national park in the country. And that's just created such a beautiful, I'm so grateful to live there, and everything in terms of like the nature's bounty that we get to experience every single day. And I also live on Lake Michigan in Michigan City. But we also live in a sacrifice zone. So on those shores, 50 miles of shoreline, it's checkered, right, with a panorama of toxic industry. You throw a stone, you're gonna hit a cluster of Superfund sites, chemical waste processing facilities, coal plants, a refinery. And for us, right, that's really created such injustice in our communities and disproportionate impacts. Cumulative impacts, right? Because it's not just one coal plant, it's not just one refinery, it's all of it, which we know in Chicago, right, that there's really this shared injustice that we have with this corridor of toxic pollution. And so just kind of bringing into center to Robert Bullard, who really coined the term and giving definition for this is, we as communities are being sacrificed for the profit motive. And we call this, basically what we're living in is the extractive economy. And this is a picture of the BP refinery. And that's in Whiting, Indiana, one of the areas that we really activate and organize in. And this is a picture of when BP decided to uncontrollably flare and have basically a mass belching of pollution, everything cancer-causing hydrogen sulfide, benzene, into our communities. And still to this day, there has been no penalties. There have been no ramifications for BP and what they've done to our communities. And this is every day, right? This looks like straight out of Lord of the Rings, right? This is like Mordor. No, this is actually, right, folks living in the sacrifice zone every single day in Northwest Indiana. As you can see, all of those homes, the folks that every single day are being sacrificed. And we'll talk a little bit about BP and our campaign to stop the pipeline soon. And this is just kind of how, right, the extractive economy plays out in our everyday lives, and the fact that the climate crisis is, right, just a symptom of a much larger issue, that our system is broken, right? It's predicated in capitalism, it's rooted in dig, burn, dump, and that kind of economy that fuels folks like, right, BP as a major actor. And also, right, really fueling the US war machine, right, the war in Gaza and all of it. It is not an economy, right, that is for the people. It's for making money, keeping the rich richer and the poor poorer. And this is, right, why we see things like with the horrible disaster at BP play out within our community. So this is actually from Climate Justice Alliance, and we're a member organization of them and their founding Just Transition framework. So what are we doing about the extractive economy? And again, we're going to talk a little bit more about the actual full framework and transitioning away through William and Kaitlyn's portions, but through our organizing, we've really been trying to chip away at the pillars of the extractive economy. And so for us, within a few different fights, and with art all being so center and informative for all of them, with Michigan City, we have been, as we mentioned, that's been our founding fight, organizing for years to clean up the coal ash waste. And we actually sued the EPA and had no idea what we were getting into, but we knew, like, we had to do this, right? Because our communities are at stake, right? Everything is on the line. We showed up, and after, again, years of legal advocacy and organizing, we were able to get the strongest federal coal ash rule in the history of the US. And so that's us coming together with our allies, El Southeast Environmental Task Force, Climate Justice Alliance, ton of folks all mobilized in Chicago, and this was the day of the Canadian wildfires where it was like the worst, right, that you remember very clearly about that in 2023. So we were mobilized and galvanizing, like choking on, right, the most polluted air, and we still showed up, right, at Federal Plaza. We rallied, and actually this year we were able to get that coal ash rule, which we've been really, really proud of, and William and Kaitlyn have had everything to do with that. And then over there to the right, you'll see the Stop CO2 Pipeline. That's a current campaign that have been really activated around and trying to stop BP from basically capturing all of their carbon and pollution and just trying to pump it underground under our communities and creating basically a CO2 graveyard that we feel like is a ticking time bomb. This is what we call a false solution, and has no place in a just transition to a regenerative economy. It's something that we're seeing right in Illinois. It's part of what we call the Midwest Alliance for Clean Hydrogen, which is a fallacy, and that's something that where Indiana, Michigan, and Illinois are all a part of it. And so they're going to be taking all of this 23 million metric tons per year of CO2 and just piping it through our communities. Does that sound like a bad idea? Yeah. So we got organized, and we've been having a series of activities. We've been knocking doors, pounding pavement, to be able to get out general awareness about this. And through art and doing these art builds with William and through Kaitlyn as well, really trying to amplify that awareness and bringing community together. And another thing we've been really part of is how we're building community wealth and being able to bring about the regenerative economy to the solar sector. And so we've been training folks, lower income folks that wouldn't otherwise be able to have access to this, and getting them to become solar installers, helpers, and entrepreneurs. So we've been really excited about that. That's actually been led by the NAACP in Michigan City, and we've been so proud to be a partner of that and being able to build local community wealth. As mentioned with the Just Transition Framework, what we organize with is through the Climate Justice Alliance and Movement Generations Framework. The Just Transition Framework goes much farther back than that. It really was forged through the trade unionist movement and with environmental justice communities, like dating back to Tony Mazzocchi and really around the peace movement against the bomb. And so through that, Tony Mazzocchi really coined the phrase, well, there's a super fund for dirt, there has to be one for the workers. And so that's really where that came about. And through that, after so many years, it's taken on much more of a holistic term where we're really talking about communities at the front lines as well as the workers. How are we building solidarity? How are we advocating for communities to be able to get their power back, right? And to be able to be at the forefront of decision making, right? And that's really what it's all about is shifting those pillars of power into the hands of the front lines. And then, yeah, I think too with Just Transition, as mentioned, it's really a step towards building the regenerative economy, a visionary framework, imagining that just futures are possible, that a new world is possible. And then this is just showing what does that look like, right, in terms of a regenerative economy and the different pillars where we are not living, right, in this regenerative economy. This right now, right, is very much our hopes and dreams articulated and what could be. But certainly for us, it's about confronting the comforts of U.S. empire and really looking at, right, the system and not just looking at quick fixes like how are we sequestering carbon, how are we planting a tree. It's really, again, how do we not just embody it within our lives, but really through our everyday modes of production and systems of relationship. So this is not, right, what we're embodying just yet, but through certainly our art, the Visioning Project, we're trying to bring that to life and make those other worlds possible. So what is the Visioning Project? I'm going to give a little bit of a touch base to it, and we're going to hear again more about what that's looked like for these artists in collaboration with JTNWI. The overview is that we really started, and I know they're going to talk more about this, looking at, it was kind of going to be a different project in many ways, but it ultimately came to looking at, okay, let's put out a call to artists across the region to dream with us of this just transition. What does that look like through the eyes of across the spectrum, young, old, across the Northwest Indiana and Calumet region? And so we sort of casted a wide net and invited folks in to dream with us. And we did that in spring of this year and kind of kept it open through July and to see who we could bring in. And there was a lot of great responses. And for that was really a big goal of this, in addition to creating a dynamic space for artists to share and dream and have that connection with community organizations, and to be able to host additional visionary activities through that and continue talking about the framework, continuing talking about how do we build those intersections with artists and communities in such a way, unlike anything that we've been able to do before in Northwest Indiana as such a historic sacrifice zone. So this was the call for artists that we put out and asked for folks to submit and gave them sort of the criteria of just, here's the framework, let's see what they come back with. And it was really interesting just to see how folks all approached it, because there is no one size fits all. We know that folks would have so many rich imaginations and articulations of this, and they really did. So we put it out, and through that, we were able to hold a lot of visionary activities, as mentioned. So we did art builds, and as you can see up here at the podium, we did some different bandana and banner making, all through Kaitlyn and William and Emily, who's not present with us. And just getting people to start just putting it out on paper and putting ink to paper, getting out those dreams, those imaginations, getting activated around the ideas and the concepts that we were talking about. We did it at universities, Purdue and Indiana University, also in community at different Earth Day and other celebrations that were happening within the month. And it was incredible. This all culminated, actually, we're like fresh off the exhibition. So again, you're getting us like full on fresh and messy, kind of working through this process that is still ongoing. But we held it in July, and it just concluded in August. We did a huge debut at Paul Henry's in Hammond, and we're able to bring in poets and dancers and musicians and textile makers, printmakers, all to do, and photographers, all to be able to come together for this exhibition. And that's just some of us in the cohort at the exhibition itself, with Kaitlyn's beautifully designed flyer. And this is some of the pictures that, you know, give you a bit of a spark of what that looked like, but it was just truly such an amazing, profound event, and coming together of artists across the spectrum, as mentioned, young and old, all trying to collectively dream of how do we transition from this extractive economy to a new world. So it was, you know, a beautiful day, a powerful day, and I'm really excited just to kind of dig in a little bit more during the Q&A about what that's looked like and kind of showcasing some more of the artists. And with that, I'm gonna turn it over to William. Thank you so much.
I'm going to try and see if this works for me or if I'm going to have to stand up. Hi, everyone. My name is William Estrada. I am a multidisciplinary artist, educator, and I'm currently working as a teaching artist at an elementary school, teaching pre-K through 8. Been there for the last 23 years. And I've also working at the UIC School of Art and Art History, where I'm a clinical assistant professor, specifically focusing more on art education or doing teacher training for undergrads who want to become high school art teachers. And I also teach printmaking at UIC. But a lot of the work that I've been doing has originated with my own experience growing up. I was born in Southern California, grew up in Mexico, specifically the state of Jalisco. And when I was about 9 or 10, we came to Chicago, and I've lived across 7 different neighborhoods in the south and southwest side of Chicago. So earlier on, when I was in another workshop and folks were like, what is home? I was like, I have a complicated relationship with that, right? I came from a family that had a mixed status, right? Multiple of my families were undocumented, so there was a lot of conversations around where we belonged and what we didn't, right? And even coming into Chicago public schools, thinking about where I was represented in the curriculum that I was taught. So growing up, I was really interested in art, but art was not something that was really encouraged in our neighborhoods, and it wasn't something that we didn't have access to any cultural programming, right? So the only art that I saw in the streets were mostly graffiti, which had connotations of gangs, right, or of creating neighborhoods that were quote unquote bad. So a lot of my relationship to art early on was negative, and I didn't really see a lot of artists in my neighborhood that were celebrated. When I went to high school, an amazing art teacher by the name of Cheryl Stallings, she introduced me to Jacob Lawrence, which was the first artist that I learned of and who I could relate to. And it was actually coming to the Chicago History Museum in the early 90s, where he had his exhibition on the Great Migration, that I completely related to a lot of the series, right? And seeing his documentation of his family coming from the south of the US to the north, right? And the segregation that they ended up encountering, the racism, right? The housing disparities that they ended up encountering. And it was through those images that I started seeing a relationship from my family and the ways that I could tell my own stories through art making. And that's kind of where I decided to become an artist. Through my through my path of becoming an artist, I discovered art education. Art education was, I went to an art school, and the art school was a complete cultural shock. Not only economically, but culturally. It was one of the first spaces where I realized the lack of resources that I had grown up with, and also the lack of representation, right? And I completely felt inadequately prepared to exist in these spaces. And it was within those experiences that I discovered art education. And art education was one of the only places where the type of artwork that I was interested in exploring, which was really focused on social justice and activism, was in question. I was constantly told as an artist that artists didn't make work that was around social justice because that was not real artwork that belonged out in the community. And it was devalued because that work couldn't be represented in gallery spaces or museum spaces. And because of the school that I went to, right, a lot of the community conversations were like, well, you're going to this elitist art school, so what is your relationship to this space? Even though I was part of those communities, right? So it was this conversation of like, where do I belong? Do I belong in these institutional academic spaces, or do I belong in this community grassroots spaces, right? And at that point in time, I wasn't quite sure of where my place was as an artist. And it was in art education that I found a home. And I found a space where I could explore these ideas further without necessarily having answers, right? Because I was still becoming more critically aware, and I feel that I'm still becoming critical aware, right, of the intersections of our experiences and the historical aspects that have shaped the way that we see ourselves, the way that resources are present in our community, or the way that historically communities have been historically robbed of resources, and then we've been blamed for not having resources. So what I started doing is really thinking about what could, as an art teacher, what kind of themes could we address to use art as a tool to mobilize and organize ourselves in our own neighborhoods? How could we use art as a way to think through how knowledge is created, what knowledge is celebrated, where knowledge exists, but also who gets to claim the title of artist? What kind of artwork is celebrated, and what kind of experiences are represented within the context of, capital A art, right? And I slowly started exploring these ideas. Some of the work that I started doing initially was, I'm a K through 12 certified art teacher, but I completely rejected working in public schools, and I preferred working in community organizations because I wanted to have a lot more freedom to talk around these social justice issues. But at the time, I believed I was not going to be able to have these conversations in public schools. So I started painting murals across different Chicago public schools. A lot of them thinking about migration and thinking about metaphors, using the monarch butterfly as a metaphor about migration, but we would also talk about race, power structures, systems, housing and housing insecurity, and sacrifice zones, right? Thinking about why these toxic sites or industrial corridors always exist next to Black and brown neighborhoods. A lot of the work that I do is primarily centered in North Lawndale and Little Village. For the last, since the pandemic, a lot of the focus of my work has really been in Little Village. I actually haven't done tons of work in North London in the last 4 years, but I've always been interested in this economy of neighborhoods that are divided by either bridges or railroads, and specifically the way that Black and brown neighborhoods are pitted against each other around the lack of resources that exist, when wealthier neighborhoods have a lot more resources because there's more wealth in them, right? And we're told that there's minimal resources, so we have to compete against each other for those resources. Which gets me to these conversations around this work with Just Transition Northwest Indiana. A lot of the work that I attempted to do is collaborative. My interest has really been in focusing around art education within the context of art and community art making. I've worked with multiple arts organizations across Chicago, and I'm part of various art collectives. I'm part of the Mobilized Creative Collaborative, which is 4 of us, Andres and Maria being present, and Akil Charleston, which we all have pedal-powered maker spaces, and we create out in the neighborhood. I'm also part of the Chicago Art Collective, which is about 21 individuals doing grassroots or making art for grassroots movement that support people, primarily in the Chicagoland area. I'm also part of the Just Seeds Artists Cooperative, which is an artist cooperative of like 40 of us in Canada, the US, and Mexico. And we create graphics primarily through print for global movements, for people movements globally. And my interest has really been in thinking through how can, as an educator, how do we use art making as this vehicle, not only to remind ourselves to play, but to imagine the different possibilities and to challenge systems that we've been told exist and cannot be changed. I'm not an expert in environmental justice, but I am curious. And a lot of the work that I've been doing has originally started with a conversation with Edith Tovar out of the Little Village Environmental Justice Organization about 5 years ago. Edith actually ended up reaching to the Chicago Art Collective to generate images for their Let Us Breathe campaign in relationship to the coal plant that was in Little Village and the smoke, what is the name of that? What is that? Yeah, the smokestack, thank you. The smokestack was going to be, was scheduled to be demolished, and it was demolished, and at that point, there was a big puff of smoke that actually covered about 3-mile radius, and it was completely botched, right? Everyone denied that they knew anything about it, and just recently, they ended up settling with a lawsuit that the Little Village Environmental Justice Organization was part of, where community members were able to get some recourse in order to begin the conversation on how to repair the harm that the company had created. So through that conversation, we were invited to think through what were some of the dreams for the neighborhood. And we did a call for artists and thinking about what were their dreams for Little Village, right? What was a just transition? What could a just transition potentially look like for the neighborhood? And it was through this call for artists that we started engaging more people into these conversations around what a just transition is, but also in attempting to understand what is a just transition, right? And thinking about the complications that come with ideas or concepts that we ourselves are becoming familiar with. We ended up generating a coloring book, and as part of that coloring book, we also generated a mural that took us about about 8 months or so to paint, and we painted across the neighborhood. And it was this conversation that introduced me to Ashley and Kaitlyn. It was through these conversations that we started thinking about the Just Transition framework. I had learned about it through the Little Village Environmental Justice Organization, but again, I was still trying to deconstruct some of that knowledge, right, and think about what that looked like specifically in the neighborhoods that I grew up in, and engaging conversation with my students, my family, my neighbors. And there's 8 principles. There's When We Read, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. I'm not going to be able to read it from here. Regenerative ecological economies, meaningful work, culture and tradition, self-determination, solidarity, resources and power, and then building the things that we need now. A lot of the conversations that we started having through these Just Transition was really thinking about how do we start engaging as artists, how do we start engaging with concepts that we are still familiarizing ourselves with, and how do we engage in the difficult conversations that we need to have in order to explore what are our own biases, what are the preconceived notions that we have about communities, and our role, right, as artists in either creating culture or maintaining power structures that are harmful to us, right? And I think part of the conversation in this is in thinking about how are we able to invite people into conversations that are not always part of them, but there's policies that are being created that directly impact them. And as artists, I believe that it's our responsibility to invite everyone into these conversations to imagine, right, different possible worlds. And also in thinking about how do we also think through our role as artists in creating and also in challenging our notions of what we've been taught within the institutions or systems that we've grown up in. So these are 8 graphics that I ended up generating as part of the conversation. And when Kaitlyn and Ashley and Emily and we were having a conversation around these Just Transition frameworks, and all of us were like, well, we're still trying to figure out what this is, you know, and understanding these aspects and what would it mean for us to generate artwork when we're not experts on it, but we're trying to figure out how to ethically represent ideas. And there are these singular stories that are coming from us as artists, right? So I ended up generating 8 graphics that were meant to, or are meant to exist out in public. These are all available free digitally for people to use. We ended up printing various risographs that were for sale as part of the exhibition that we had of Hammond, Indiana. And then sometime in the next couple of weeks or so, they will get printed, and they're actually going to be sent up to our Just Seeds shop so people can purchase them. But as part of my practice, I'm also going to be printing various renditions of these, and when I do public workshops out in the neighborhoods of Chicago, they'll get distributed for free as well. But if anybody wants them digitally, let me know, and I'll be more than happy to send them to you. But thinking about Buen Vivir, right, means that we can live well without living better at the expense of others. And thinking about the practices as an artist, how do we start generating communal spaces for us to learn from each other and share resources so it doesn't become competitive, or we start garnishing all the resources, right? Which is something that growing up, right, like we were constantly told, like, you have to look for number one, you have to look out for number one, and thinking about how do we start deconstructing those messages in order for us to start sharing resources and build spaces that are beneficial for everyone. Building what we need now, there's a lot of discussion and thinking about we must build the worlds that we need now. This may begin at a local small scale and must expand to begin to displace extractive practices. Again, one of the pieces that we were thinking through when creating this image It's really thinking that when we have conversations around creating systemic change, it can become extremely overwhelming because these systems are so hard for us to imagine them otherwise. And I think part of it is like, how do we start having these conversations and starting to put things in place that are small scale, so we slowly build collective power. And we're practicing this together with our families, with our loved ones, with our chosen families, and thinking through what are the aspects of, I don't know what happened, but what are the aspects of the work that we do now that we can start practicing in order to model this for each other and with each other. Culture and tradition. Capitalism has forced many communities to sacrifice culture and tradition for economic survival. And thinking about my own childhood, right? And thinking about the things that I had to sacrifice of myself, of my identity, in order to assimilate and be a quote unquote American, not a hyphenated American, but an American with a capital A, right? In understanding, right, that in the erasing of our cultures, we're also erasing a big part of our identity and a big part of what makes this nation what it is, right? And it is only through the embracing and respect of our culture and tradition that we can become a whole nation. Equitable redistribution of resources and power, where we must work to build new systems that are good for all people and not just a few, which is, I think one of the hardest concepts. And I see this growing up and thinking about our elders and thinking about my friends, where folks are like, well, we struggled, so they have to struggle in order to earn this, right? And we see this constantly in questioning. It's like, well, if you struggled, what did that teach you? And was that okay? And if you didn't enjoy that, right? Like, why do we want other people to struggle through that process as well? Why can we not make these experiences easier for others, even if we are not benefiting from that? Meaningful work. Just Transition centers on the development of human potential, creating opportunities for people to learn, grow, and develop to be their full capacities and interests, and thinking about what does meaningful work mean, right? And thinking about the value that certain work has over others, and the value of work, specifically of the work of women, right? And thinking about what is valued and what isn't, and reimagining these spaces for us to actually think about all the invisible labor that happens in our communities that we absolutely depend on, but isn't discussed. Regenerative ecological economies. Just Transition must advance ecological resilience, reduce resource consumption, restore biodiversity and traditional ways of life, and undermine extractive economies, including capitalism, that erode the ecological basis of our collective well-being. And thinking again, getting in touch with the land and really being able to relearn the information and the resources that the land provides with us, and bringing that balance back to our lives, right? Instead of seeing the land as something that we extract from, thinking about what is the balance that we have between the land and the spaces that we live in, and our relationship to them. Self-determination. All peoples have the right to participate in decisions that impact their lives. This requires democratic governance in our communities. And as we're having a lot of conversations around democracy right now, especially as we're having conversation around democracy right now, especially in relationship to the elections, really thinking about an actual democracy, right, where the people's rights are respected and people across class and across economic spaces are listened to and are provided with resources to not only live full lives, but also experience joy. And then, of course, solidarity. The just transition must be liberatory and transformative. In thinking through, right, what does solidarity look like? Again, in thinking about spaces that we might not necessarily be affected by, but are affecting others. And thinking about what does that look like in order for us to actually break down walls, right? And think through what are the spaces that we need to build for ourselves that are going to be open to everyone that wants to be in those spaces. In thinking through of these aspects and in generating these images, a lot of the work that I do in education, whether I'm teaching pre-kindergarten, undergrads or grad students, is really thinking about what is the relationship of artists to ethically engage in knowledge creation through art making. And a lot of the questions that I like to ask is thinking about what is the artist's responsibility to things that are happening in neighborhoods, whether you live in those neighborhoods or not, but also how can cultural workers or organizations invite artists into conversations so artists are part of the organizing work happening in shaping policies and legislation at a small scale or a larger scale. I started doing this collaborative resistance print shop at usually taught in the summers at the UIC School of Art and Art History, where a lot of the conversations that we have are thinking about how do we use printmaking as a way to take research that exists already in the city and teach artists how to go through research, how to, what does data mining look like? How do we start interpreting this research and create graphics that are then gifted back to these organizations in order to not only talk about the relationship of artists and how art is research, but also to invite the researchers that are putting these studies out into the world to invite artists as part of these conversations around the research that they're doing. And what we're starting to do is we've been doing work with the Institute for Race and Public Policy at UIC. We've also done work with the Chicago Housing Authority. We've done work with multiple arts organizations and community organizations in the city, but then we've also partnered up with various environmental justice organizations and other housing organizations that are particularly working through land trust in the city and cooperative housing to generate these types of these types of images. This summer, we ended up working with Just Transition Northwest Indiana as a way to think about these just transitions and invite students into these conversations. And this is some of the work that they ended up generating. Leslie Navarro, which you can follow them at Windy Workshop, ended up generating 11 by 17 graphic around solidarity. And the description was they tried to bury us, they didn't know we were seeds. It's highlighted in green surrounding the image of a watermelon, which represents Palestine. Palestine is usually symbolized through a watermelon because the colors are similar to their flag. And the watermelon is dripping juice onto and holding seeds. Plants go around the palm, producing fruits of hope. The seeds are hope for the future that growth, safety, water, and food will come back. Second one is Raven Day. You can follow them at Raven Day with a 3. The theme was around meaningful work, and part of this was the print portrays various fruits, vegetables, and flowers in additional to a central text that states cultivate growth. I wanted to create a print that portrays how we can enjoy the fruits of our labor through teamwork and patience. Emerging near the hands is a native flower, the purple coneflower. The hands signify the work required to cultivate community for oneself and one's community. The next one is Viviana Ortiz. I lost track of my time. Viviana Ortiz, it's Viviana Culture and Tradition, and the print portrays words, merecemos crecer, we deserve to grow, with echinacea flower in papel picado inspired design. Papel picado is often created and used during a celebration or a decoration. Through this image, we encourage the celebration of culture as well as strength. Siguiendo Raíces by Alejandra Guzmán. around culture and tradition, and Siguiendo Raíces is a piece that drives us to share the importance of preserving traditions and memories. Daniel Gantner, equitable redistribution of resources and power. The print stresses the importance of alternative energy sources in creating a future for us as human beings and the rest of the living organisms of our planet. This is Bit Schobert, Buen Vivir. The print represents a forest spirit or nature spirit. She's meant to personify a maternal godlike figure meant to protect the integrity of Illinois ecosystems. And then Al Yuquis, equitable distribution of wealth and power. And this is related specifically to the BP Whiting Refinery, located on the shores of Lake Michigan, just south of Chicago. It's a major air and freshwater polluter of one of the Midwest Great Lakes. This print illustrates the ecological fallout from the violent exploitation of land and resource extraction. And then Giovanni Suniga, What the World Needs Now. Print description is included an image of people of all different ages, young adults and elders, to express the idea of community. Dan Velasco, Self-Determination, and the print displays a bouquet of thistles surrounded by thorn vines. The piece explores self-determination through viewing the environment as its own community. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, William. Hello, everyone. My name is Kaitlyn Stancy, and I am nowhere near as established as William. But I am just starting out and having fun learning my place and learning where I fit in my community. So I am a multidisciplinary artist, designer, and educator. I teach graphic design and printmaking over at Indiana University Northwest in Gary. And I truly do believe in the power of art and design to make a difference in our world, in our daily lives. Even if that is just getting the conversation started and getting the door open so that we can start talking about this and meeting the right people and working with the right organizations. So over the years, I've done a number of different works, projects that range in themes of pollution, deception, and satire, and all sorts of things. This first piece is about fracking, obviously. The second piece is a comment on the honeybee colony collapse disorder, which we're still battling today. And the third piece is a little bit more crazy. It's about weather modification, specifically cloud seeding being used for commercial purposes, such as weddings and events. Yes, a company is really doing this out in London. Their name is Oliver's Travels. If you don't believe me, look them up. So pretty bizarre stuff, can't make it up. But one of the larger projects that I've worked on, I did as an undergrad over at IUN. Yes, I went to school there too. I did a large project, a false solutions welcome campaign for the town of Pines, Indiana, that advertised the coal contamination issues there as perks of living there. And a reason to move there. So it was a bit sarcastic, a little over the top, but I was a bit upset about how all of these problems were just being swept under the rug and not being addressed properly. So I got to work and I created a whole branding campaign for this satirical false solutions company called Sitting Duck. I made the logo, I made some tote bags, welcome kit full with business cards and a welcome letter and a travel guide with a map, and a survival kit that included all of these impractical solutions like a jar of fresh air when we don't have any more, or a blindfold to just block it all out, and a cool companion, like a pet rock, if you will. Some super soil, contaminated coal ash soil to grow your flowers in, and a fake robotic bee for when we have no more bees left. I even took it further and made my own newspaper dispenser out of cardboard. And there's my map up there, which is mostly accurate with a few little extra sarcasm things added, sarcastic. And of course, my own Artificial Times newspaper that I filled the dispenser with. And that highlighted different properties around the area that I found while researching out there. There was a number of properties that were, abandoned or taken down, if you will, vacated, and with signs that said U.S. government owned, contaminated, keep out. And so I thought that was some good material to use for this. So I threw that in there. I threw the picture of the coal plant in there and a bunch of other fun commentary. And I even made a cardboard bench with the sign and some realty ads, and really had a lot of fun with this project. And I didn't mention, if you didn't catch, there was at the bottom of the newspaper dispenser and the bench up there, there is actual coal ash that I took from the town of Pines. I went out there and there's this entire road, or there was, don't know if it still looks like this, but at the time there was this entire road over by the landfill just full of this coal ash, just for people to drive all over and kick up dust everywhere. So I went and took a good sample. It's still there. And I brought it into the gallery for my show. Don't know if I was supposed to do that. But after the project was done, I didn't know what to do with it, so I didn't want to just throw it away. Didn't know how to dispose of it, so I thought I would just take it back where I got it from. So I didn't want to just leave it there, though, so I left a little fun message of waste management on the road. Don't know if anybody found it, but I definitely left it there. And I guess backtracking a little bit, yes, I know Ashley touched on it a little bit, but yeah, if you haven't heard of the town of Pines and the problems there, or coal ash is the byproduct of burning coal for power, which is the method used at the plant in Michigan City, which is just down the way from the town of Pines. And if you couldn't tell from the map, the town of Pines, if you didn't know where that was, it's right next to Beverly Shores and Michigan City, and wedged right in between all of our National Lakeshore land. So that's where it's at. And that's why it kind of hit home for me too, is because it's so close to, I grew up in the area, close enough at least to visit there all my childhood, and I couldn't believe that this was happening so close to such a beautiful place that I grew up around, and nobody was really talking about it or doing anything about it. And so NIPSCO, Northern Indiana's public service company, throughout the 60s and 70s, thought it was a great idea to use coal ash for use in the roadbeds throughout the town of Pines, as well as the construction landscaping filling through hundreds of properties throughout the town. So the entire town is literally full of this contaminated waste. And from the early 80s to the early 2000s, they dumped all of the contaminated waste into an unlined landfill in the town of Pines. And the state of Indiana and the EPA knew that this was leaking into the groundwater and the local river systems, but they decided not to do anything about it until the community members started complaining that their water tasted weird and people were getting sick, and they started getting their soil tested. So they finally put a stop to that. But yeah, so it was leaking for quite some time before they actually started to do anything about it. And since then, it's been labeled as a Superfund site, but the cleanup has been very slow going and very difficult because, again, it's everywhere. And the rules that they've got in place for the cleanup aren't even very strict, because how can they be when it's literally everywhere? So there's still a lot of concern about how that's actually being properly cleaned up. And again, for years, people didn't even realize that this was happening. So their kids were playing around in the dirt and they were growing vegetables in their backyards and had no idea the kinds of effects it was having on their health, their families, and their environment. So this project is obviously what led me and Ashley to meet. She found my work. I don't even know how. I Googled. I put it up on my site, online or whatever, and Ashley found me. And she reached out and said, hey, love what you're doing, would love to see if you want to get involved in the organization. And I said, that sounds great, but I just moved to Arizona. I moved to Arizona for 5 years for a little bit. So I was like, I don't know how much help I'll be from across the country, but let's keep in touch. So then when I finally moved back and started teaching at the university, I thought this is the perfect opportunity to start getting involved in the community and start doing the work that I care about. So this led to some conversations and the visioning project. So that was really exciting. We started talking about this idea for this project, and I was like, yes, let's do it. What do we need? And we're like, we need a logo. So threw together a logo, got to work on the branding a little bit, some of the marketing advertisements for the art exhibition that we eventually had. Throughout the summer, we had a lot of tabling events trying to talk about these issues and recruit artists for our show. So I worked on the bandana designs. And again, the bandanas, they reference quotes and phrases from personal testimonies and protest signage from the EPA hearing that was held in Chicago here last year, 2023. So I did the bandanas, and then I also did some Protect Mother Earth prints and tote bags for Earth Month. Another great opportunity to get out there in the community and talk about all of this stuff and see what everybody's got to say. And of course, I had a lot of fun making swag bags for all of the artists who participated in our show. So I printed tote bags and prints. The Solidarity print on the right is Emily's that you'll see closer up in a second here. But I filled it with stickers and buttons and educational pamphlets and printed some thank you cards and threw a bandana in there and licensed to Dream notebooks. Had way too much fun with that. And then the art that I actually made for the exhibit. So I decided to focus on 3 different principles, but I made 4 different pieces. I made 3 posters and 1 zine. So the first one was Buen Vivir, which mentioned earlier, of course, focuses on living well without living better at the expense of others. And that includes people, plants, and animals. We all are connected and deserving of fresh air, water, soil, food, shelter, etc. And I chose to incorporate the bison in this poster because I took this picture in South Dakota last year and thought it was pretty good and worth using, but also that it was super appropriate for this because of the history of Western colonialism and its impact on our indigenous ancestors and almost extinction of the bison. And because of all of that, it's become a symbol of resilience and abundance and strength and unity. So I thought it was great to incorporate for this principle. And again, just remembering, by remembering the past, that we can build a better present and future. The next one, I'm getting up for this one because it's a wordy one. Which, of course, we already went over this definition again, but regenerative ecological economics is referring to advancing ecological resilience, reducing resource consumption, restoring biodiversity and traditional ways of life, and undermining extractive economies, including capitalism, that erode the ecological basis of our collective well-being. Like, wow, what a mouthful, right? And that's why we wanted to try and visualize what some of these principles mean and talk about them a little bit more specifically. So for this principle, I wanted to reference the 9R strategies for a circular economy, which is a model of production and consumption that involves extending the life cycle of products for as long as possible, using some of these methods like sharing, leasing, reusing, repairing, refurbishing, recycling. And if you notice, some of the first things on this list are refuse and rethink. Some of the first steps we need to do for analyzing what's going on with all of these issues is let's refuse the way that we're doing it and let's rethink this and figure out a better way. And I chose to incorporate a sunflower for this principle because not only are they beautiful and amazing for our pollinator friends, but it's an extremely regenerative plant that can help sequester carbon and enrich and remediate soil health. And they also have super powerful medicinal uses and contain phytoremediation properties that help remove hazardous substances like heavy metals and radiation from contaminated soil. So I don't know it's enough to reverse the pines, but it might help a little bit. Every little bit helps, right? Oh, now I've got the clicker and I've got a button. Okay. The next poster that I did was on composting, which serves as an actionable example of the principle regenerative ecological economics. Something that we can do on an individual level to help address these production and consumption issues. Because it's one thing to talk about all these words and all of these methods, but what does that actually look like in real life in my personal daily life? And so I wanted to mention composting because it's something that we all should be doing. And I didn't, until actually researching this in the summer, actually start doing it myself. So if you're not doing it yet, you should. But composting recycles organic materials into nutrient-rich, biologically stable soil, allowing us to grow more nutritious food. It helps prevent food waste and other organic materials from ending up in landfills. It sequesters carbon and helps reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and it reduces reliance on chemical fertilizers and pesticides. And it also does strengthen sustainable local food production by using locally generated food scraps and materials to create this valuable soil amendment that helps plant growth. So, super powerful thing to get involved with. And the last thing I did was create a zine, focusing on the principle of meaningful work. I created a zine because it was the only thing that I really could envision, depicting this principle for. Because meaningful work is referring to creating opportunities for people to learn and grow and become their best selves. So for me, I was like, I don't want to just make work about that. I want the piece to actually be meaningful for the person. So I made a little self-help zine that kind of focused on that and kind of went over some of the Just Transition framework and added little questions and phrases and tips and tools for you to help you think about what is important to you and what goal are you trying to reach and what does success look like for you? What is your personal manifesto in life? So there's little things in here that, again, you're like, what makes you happy and what does your dream life look like? And, let's get a little bit more specific with SMART goals. Let's, be specific and measurable about the things that we actually want to do, and let's actually plan the map to get there. So the back of it is a journey map, if you will, referencing a mountain and even Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Again, asking you, what is your calling and what are your intentions and how are you going to get there? I left little spaces and questions again for you to ask and fill in the different steps along the way for you to reach your top of the mountain success, whatever that looks like for you. And when you're done, what do? You keep going, you move on to the next mountain, right? And this zine was risograph printed by William Estrada, so thank you again so much. And that's all, folks. That's what I got. And then back to, William.
Test. Okay. So just topping it off, because we want to hear from y'all for maybe like a question or two. Bringing into the room Emily Essling, who was such a core member of this team and making our visioning project possible. She also lives in Michigan City, not too far from me. And this is a little bit of background on her. She similarly is very new to like the artist space. I think now she still is like, I don't know if I'm really an artist. But she sort of just like, I stumbled into it and just started creating cool shit. And so, Em is on her journey right now, and I think I came to know her because she offered free beer for a beach cleanup. And we came into talking, and I'm like, oh, wow, you're a really cool printmaker, and I want to know more about you. And so she started creating visuals for our Protect Lake Michigan campaign, the coal ash campaign that ultimately led to that victory against EPA with the new ruling. So she's been such an instrumental part of this and our work and advancing environmental justice in the region. She created these two pieces, which we talked about the principles, build the world we need now. Let's reach out and grab it and start planting those seeds. And then solidarity, were the principles she wanted to choose and articulate. So you can see those there of the beautiful regenerative economies with cooperatives and supporting one another, community gardens, local clinics, and so on. So really amazing pieces, and her signature fist. But yeah, just calling into the room M and all of her amazing work she did with the Visioning Project. I will end there and just please encourage y'all to check us out and check out the Visioning Project. So this is our website. Feel free to scan the code, grab our URL, and learn more about us and the amazing journey we're on. We're still on it, so excited to share back on like, what does this look like in another year? So yeah, thank you so much for listening to us. Thanks for hanging out. I don't know if we have time for even a question. Yeah? Okay, so I guess we'll start there, and then, yeah, William, if you wanna let folks know. So we have the signs for y'all to take. This is actually from our Stop the CO2 Pipeline against BP and their false solution. So feel free, please do take those. And
Printed by William.
Yeah, and then there's also some stickers, so just calling attention to that, but would love to open it up to all of y'all if you have questions for the floor. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't have much to say, but I like that. I haven't heard the idea of a false solution, but it's so clear like what it means, and like in this context, it's just like, I think a really great sort of way of framing a lot of what we're like given as possible solutions. I don't know if you have any more insight into that, that language, or sort of like how you all use it, but I really enjoyed it.
So there we go. So we did not coin it. It's actually, I think, we really started talking about it with Climate Justice Alliance, as we've referred to in the past. Again, these are market-based solutions, quote unquote, to the climate crisis, right? So we're talking about carbon trading, or again, techno fixes, again, sucking all the carbon. Hydrogen, right? What we're getting is dirty fossil fuel produced hydrogen for this hydrogen hub I talked about earlier. These are all false solutions that like are being marketed, right, as like, this is what we need, this is good for you, this is what is the answer to decarbonizing, right, our industry. But it's just greenwash, right? At the end of the day, that's all it is, and it's just a big old PR campaign for BP and these other players, and they're doing a really damn good job at it. But I think, there has been such a groundswell that's building, especially around these false solutions in our communities and in Northwest Indiana, right, South Chicago. So yeah, I think it's like, it was the same thing for me. I'm like, oh shit, okay, like now it's clicking. But unfortunately, a lot of people are really bought out on this. And again, that's because they've been doing such this great job with that. But we've been really trying to dismantle and expose that, again, this is just perpetuating business as usual. This is perpetuating capitalism as usual, continuing to keep our communities oppressed, right, low income communities of color, as it always has been. So I don't know if y'all want to add anything more to it with false solutions. And yeah, and I think, thank you so much for that question. If there's maybe one more, if we have yeah. Or even comments too, please do.
So first of all, thanks for an excellent panel. I've been able to sit in this one room all day and just listen to all the panels going on. And I'm going to honestly say, like, this is the one that I've learned the most and am the most excited about. And for one reason, the sort of regional work that you're doing over in Indiana, right? I'm very familiar with Gary, Indiana, and the work that you all are doing, like where IU sits and how it's situated in a very disinvested area, right? And one of the questions that I've been kind of thinking about is like, why art? And then this thing about movement making, right? Because a part of it is like you all are choosing to use a form that most people would question, like, is this the best tactic to take on such big issues? But at the same time, you all are like going through this like, you said, you lean it on some of the old systems of the civil rights movement. A lot of times we forget this very intentional work of movement making, institution building, all of these sort of things, and as they're really like design solutions. So could you all speak to that? Or many complexities in that question, I guess.
There it goes. I will say that I think one of the things that it's slow work, right? It's slow work, and also think that when we talk about Northwest Indiana, I know as someone that works in Chicago, but I actually live in Cicero, right? It's like, oh, the things that are happening in Northwest Indiana, like, are not related to the things that are happening here, but they are, right? Like, it's really close. It's still our drinking water. It's still, all that air, right? Actually, most of the air actually goes more towards the east because of the airflow. But there's a lot of conversations, right, of the same things that are happening with like General Iron in southeast Chicago. All of those companies are talking to each other and are organizing, and we're starting to see those same tactics being used in Northwest Indiana, right? So I think for one of the things that I like to think about is these small ways to invite people to the conversation, and it's not to offer like this is going to solve the problems, but it's like, how do we start threading the needle through multiple spaces and multiple conversations, so we start slowly tightening the circle and the relationships that we have with each other. So the fight in this neighborhood is not seen as different from the fight in another town, and for me, that's the goal, right? Like, how do we try and bring as many people into the conversation, or at least spark a curiosity of how what's happening in Whiting, Indiana is related to what happened in Lincoln Square, what happened in Southeast Chicago, what is happening in Cicero right now. Like, what are the relationships? What are the patterns that we're starting to see? So.
Yeah, if I could add to it, yeah, I agree. I don't think that art or design may be the end solution for a lot of these things, but I think it is a very strong way to get the conversation started. I think it's a very powerful tool to be able to convey a message to the masses and actually change their way of thinking and way that they live their life. And yeah, art and design, even if it's just the conversation starter to get people talking about this problem, to raise awareness about it, and to start then getting the right minds together to brainstorm and to figure out what are the right possible solutions, the most inclusive solution that we should proceed with. But I think it's a great way to start the conversation.
If I can also add that, and I think as artists, we have the opportunity to take these really hard conversations and make some beautiful work out of it. And remind folks that although all of this stuff is burning down, right? There's still joy in our communal efforts of coming together, of the power that we can wield together, of the joy and celebration that exists in our existing in these spaces, but we need each other, right? And I think it's the art, it's the dancing, it's the singing, it's the visual culture that we create that is gonna save us, and the solutions are present in our neighborhoods, but we need to come together to figure those pieces out.
I'll just say that I think oftentimes too, it's like these companies and these oppressors, the ruling elite, they want us just to, again, fall in that cycle of like, we have to be the experts, right? We have to be chasing the techno fixes, and again, realizing that we are experts in the community, right? And there has been such tremendous power through being able to convey these issues through art, even just the power of a yard sign, right? We use that so much within our campaign Fulcrum in Gary that was proposed. A glorified dump. Oftentimes, Gary becomes the dumping ground and has been the dumping ground of Chicago. Another one came in. The power of yard signs, the power of art within their campaigns. The power of even just the sign that William created for us, and the questions, right, that have come out through that, and issues that they've never seen accessible or interacted with, and now it's that light bulb, right? It's that spark. It's that accessibility to be able to meet and have a relationship with the issue and with those behind it in the communities. And so, it's as mentioned, it's part of a toolkit, but we really believe in the power of art and building community solidarity and breaking through those silos, as William said, that is keeping these like barriers that don't exist between Chicago and Northwest Indiana and Michigan, and so on and so forth, and also our shared drinking water supply that is Lake Michigan, right? That's what it is all about. Water is life, and so I think I'll add there. Do you want to jump in? Yeah. Well, thank you so much, y'all. We appreciate you. Come up to us afterwards. Take care. Thank you.